Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Princeton Review Tutor.com webinar on leveraging data to promote equity in K12 classrooms nationwide. My name is Tanya Walker and I'm joined by my host, Ed Ceja, where we will actually go through some lessons learned and data and give you some things to help you leverage the data here in your schools. Again, my name is Tanya Walker, and I'm welcome to be here. I'm happy to be here, rather. And I'm going to speak to you first. And then afterwards, my partner in crime, Ed Ceja, will talk to you a little bit more about our webinar. But before we begin, I want to tell you about our agenda. And on our agenda today, I will give you about some of the rising demands in the K12 data. What are we seeing in data? What are some of the demands that we have? Research is showing that some of our school districts are asking, and how to avoid some data overload. You know, there's a statement that says data is not about adding more to your plate, but data is making sure that you have the right things on your plate. So we'll talk about some of the ways of avoiding data overload, and then actionable data our partners are using. There's some very unique ways that our partners are actually using the data, and best practices from a data culture. And then lastly, for answers, questions and answers. So let's dive right in. Some of you may be familiar with the Princeton Review, but are you aware that Princeton Review and Tutor.com, we're actually one incredible team where you have two trusted partners, but one company. And from the Princeton Review side, most of you may be familiar that we provide test prep for students, but in our Tutor.com side, we're able to provide students with online academic support for all your students, if you will. So together, we're able to help students with passing classes, to earn an A, to achieving their scores in admissions. So we're able to provide a complimentary support for all students in all communities and tools to improve their grades, earn their target scores, and gain admissions into their dream schools. We've been around for a very long time with the Tutor.com. Tutor.com has been around for over 20 years, and we have partnered with thousands of schools, libraries, and organizations across the nation and the country, and throughout the globe, if you will. But we have over 250 academic subjects where we have experts that provide tutoring for students as well as in test prep. And we provide a true one-to-one tutoring experience where there's one tutor that's managing and that's working with one student. And with the Princeton Review, we've been around for over 40 years. So collectively, you have almost 100 years of experience of data, student support, and services that are available for parents, students, school districts, and our teachers. So what are we finding? There's a rising demand for K12 data. So I want you to take yourselves back in 2019 and think about how the world was before we had the pandemic. And imagine all the data that your school districts are receiving before 2020, and what your districts are using the data for. Well, when the pandemic happened, that changed. It changed drastically. And Learn Platform did a survey of about 3.2 million students and teachers to grab information about what type of data do they have, what are they using, what do they need? And what they found, that 3.2 million students and teachers, that 148 unique tools are used by teachers. Now imagine that. 448 unique digital tools are used on average post-pandemic. For students, there was about 143 unique digital tools. And for a district, districts use about 1,400 unique tools per month. Now I want to pause there for a minute. I think about all those unique tools, all the unique data that you're receiving from those tools, and see how things have changed. Because prior to the pandemic and spring of before the pandemic, your students and teachers did not have that many ed tech tools that were available. But what happens is that after the pandemic, we've learned that there's so many different tools out there, and that ed tech is here to stay. It's here to stay. All the data that your students are using is here to stay. But what districts want to know is that if the tools they're using, are they both effective? Are they safe? Are they improving teaching and learning? And let's be honest, can they help the budget decisions after the stimulus funds are depleted? So data is going to be very important for districts as we dive into it, not only about that you have it available for the students, but how are the students using it, and how is this affecting the instruction in the classroom? So what you're finding also is that districts are using a hybrid. They're using a hybrid, not only in person, but they're using online tutors as well. So imagine all of these different data points. How are you collecting all of this together in one area to make sure that you're making the right decisions for your district? So I have a question. Has your data shifted since the pandemic? Has your data shifted since the pandemic? You can write it in your chat, write your answers in the chat, because I want you to think about it. Are you collecting more data? Are you collecting more data, and what are you using with the data? Do you find that you need to train your teachers on the data?
And please share your answers in the Q&A box. Awesome, thank you. We're seeing yes come in. There have been shifts.
Because you think about it, the pandemic limited educators' ability to access student performance. Just think about that. Your students are home. How can you actually assess a student's performance? It changed drastically. So now let's think about the data before the pandemic. So as I mentioned, before the pandemic, as a parent, and I know we have several parents that are on our that have joined us today, that before the pandemic, you were able to pull reports on state math scores, your ELA scores. You were able to find out your students' attendance, your graduation rates. All of those insights that are used in a day-to-day instruction for a classroom was available for your students. But the pandemic left us with an incomplete picture for students that are limited to these resources, because how are we as educators, able to assess, are these students actually, are the students monitoring, how do you monitor the students' learning, etc.? So it kind of changed a little bit, but before it was readily available for us. We were able to identify all those things that students needed. So what has happened next? The K12 data after the pandemic. After the pandemic, the data that we use is much more is useful for us, because we need to know the effects of the pandemic, because it's yielded a much more complex picture for students, right? When you think about the students that are ready academically, their social emotional learning, awareness or engagement in the classrooms, and how does that affect the data that you're receiving? And let's think about it. After the pandemic, you have several other hybrid ways of providing instruction for students. You have virtual versus in-person instruction. Are your students dropping by grade level, their performance? All of those things that are rising for students. And let's not think about the fact that colleges and universities are now making it test optional for students. So what happens is now the achievement gap for cohorts and for classes is much wider than ever. And then your social emotional students that are struggling social emotionally with the pandemic, as opposed to those students that are affected by it academically. So the awareness of student support tools are very important, and the data is very important for districts to be able to make decisions. But often the case, students who are struggling the most are least aware of the support tools that are available. And the students are most likely using those are students that are high achieving students. So how do you make it equitable that all students are, there are resources that are available for all students and all students are using those resources? That puts another layer on there when you look at the data. You have resources, or as we say, the ed tech learning tools that are available, but how do you make sure that students are using them? All those things roll and come into play when you start using the data. So my question, are you struggling to make actionable use of the data in your classroom, school, or classroom? Are you struggling to make actionable use of data in your district, school, or classroom? And if so, what are you struggling with?
Again, feel free to provide your answers in the Q&A box.
And even with our parents, I know that we have several parents that have joined us. As you receive reports from your students about your students, are you struggling to make some actionable items regarding the reports that are provided to you by your districts?
And some of the feedback we're receiving is, yes, there's too much data. Yes, but administrators are overwhelmed with the data from so many sources. For the feedback.
That's very consistent to what we're finding across the country. That, remember when I stated earlier that Learn Platform provided a survey and they realized that there are at least 148 unique tools per teacher. Imagine all of that data coming at you at one time. It's almost like a fire hose of data, right? And for districts to be able to dig a little deeper and pull out those things that are most useful for them. Yes, that is definitely a challenge that you find across the country. And because of that, another survey by Harris Poll on behalf of the Data Quality Company was able to provide some other insight on what a parent or a participant just stated is data overload. As I stated, it's almost as if you have a data from a fire hose. And the solution to make more data isn't always more data. It's a way to make good use of the data we have and make it actionable. What we're finding, as well as looking on here with 99% of our superintendents feel that the state could be more helpful, that they want to lean on their state on providing the data. 49% need more useful tools and technology, and to see patterns. They want to see what are the patterns, because as we say, you can find change in your patterns, if you will. That more training. How do you help teachers interpret the data that they're receiving? And 52% say that they use disaggregated data to identify school leadership. And it's so true that the tools are needed for long-term investments, tools to see patterns and changings, but superintendents want this data, but they want it to dig down a little deeper, because some of the ways that they will actually use the data is for course offerings. How do I know which courses I need to offer if I'm not able to get the data from my different sources? Using the data for curriculum alignment to post-secondary and workforce opportunities. Another way that our districts want to use the data, but it's overload. Lastly, conversations with principals and their school leaders, digging a little deeper and being able to have some very deliberate conversations, but superintendents want the data that will help them make insights to make decisions. Again, it's overload, but being very specific. How can it help with course offerings? How can I assist with curricular alignments, conversations with principals, leaders, and more importantly, how can I use this data to make decisions? With the Princeton Review, Tutor.com, we are able to help with some of the data, help you to make some of the decisions. And there are many ways to use actionable data. And we're going to go through a few examples of the data we have at Tutor.com. For example, students that are in algebra classes are requesting help, but most often in solving linear equations, which may indicate that additional instruction or intervention is needed. So if you're able to hone in exactly where the need is for most of your students, we're able to look at the different times that students are asking for help. And I love the heat map, which is there in the green. It shows you the times of day that students are asking for help. And it's not a surprise to many that the time that students are asking for help is after school, when they're home, right after dinner, before they're going to bed. When do they need help? And that's when we're leaning on our parents. How do we support our parents to support their students when your students are asking for help? And it's usually at home. Our data also helps you decide which subjects are students asking for support. If I know that students are asking for more support in Algebra 1, then as I mentioned before, those are conversations that district leaders might have with their principals and their leadership. Which grade levels are asking for support? And what helps with this data that we're able to provide you, it helps in several ways for the student, which is helping them to build their confidence in the key areas. Because if I know that several of my students are in algebra class and they need assistance, then that's where I'm going to provide additional support to help build those students, the student support. Again, actionable data of our K12 partners, with the way that they're using it, the support, if you will, is that they're able to provide alerts. Now imagine this as a teacher. Your student is home, your student, as we notice on the heat map, most of your students are asking for assistance or need assistance after 6 o'clock, but your tutor is able to identify that this student needs additional support, that the student did not have the prerequisite knowledge needed for the class or for that particular skill. If we're able to share with you that this was an extremely long session and we felt that the student didn't master that particular skill, that's the individual student data that we provide for partners that will help you actually use it for individual students, or some may say customize it because it's based off of that particular student. That's the type of data that we find that teachers want, teachers need, and more importantly, our parents need. They want that alert that, yes, my student just had an experience with this tutor, but I want the data that shows that they master the skill. Do they need additional support? Can you tell me what areas they need support? And we're able to provide you snapshots of students, where they're struggling, how they're struggling, and being able to support those scenarios. So I have a question for you. Here's my question. Are you consistently leveraging both aggregate and individual data in your schools and districts? And if so, how are you doing that? So if you're receiving data report in your districts, but then you're also receiving individual support data on your students, how are you using them?
And please provide your answers in the Q&A box, A, B, C, or D, or if you have other questions, feel free to add them there.
And which presents the greatest challenge? Which the data challenge for you? Is it leveraging the ever wide array of individual student data, Or is it comparing the data across individuals and cohorts? Or is it utilizing the data from multiple sources in a meaningful way? I'm interested to know what's the biggest challenge for you? Well, I will tell you from the partners that we have that what our challenges that I've found that we're, with our partners is how do you leverage the widening array of individual student data? Because I, Tanya, might receive data that I need assistance in Algebra 2, but Mercedes might find that she needs assistance in US history. So how do you actually use all of those data points to help drive instruction? So that's what I find with our partners on how they're using that data.
And we're getting also a ton of feedback with answer C as well, utilizing data from multiple sources in a meaningful way.
Yes, again, there we go with the fire hose of data. Again, I go back to that study from Learn Platform. Think about the districts and how many different tools are used per month. Imagine all of that data pulled in. And specifically, when you think about tutors and you think about your in-person tutors and your on-demand tutors, your virtual tutors, how do you pull all the data together in a meaningful way that will help your superintendent and your school leaders make decisions? I agree with that one as well. And so getting started, using data constructively. Well, there are 4 tips that everyone in our educators in our K12 community like to make the most of with data. Training teachers and staff, training. That goes from training them how to, not only how to interpret the data, but what do you do with the data after you receive it? I like to go back to putting my Princeton review hat on. When your students actually receive their reports from the SAT or the ACT, and they've taken the practice test and they have their report, what do they do next? That's always the question. Now, I've received the data, then what? So training your teachers and staff, once they have the data, now what? Once they're trained, what are they doing with that information? And how do you actually foster a culture of data sharing culture, if you will? Then also identifying high-performing classes. Oftentimes, our best practices are in our schools, in our school districts. And the data will also help us to identify those high-performing schools and we can share with each other with their instructional methodologies in the classroom. So you're able to look within house of some best practices. Using the data to make achievable goals. Sometimes we have goals that may take us a long time to achieve, if you will, but looking at the data where we can have tiny steps, if you will, with achieving our goal. And lastly, to build awareness about the support tools. It's very important for us to be able to make sure that students are utilizing the tools and everyone knows the benefit of the tools that are available. So those are the things that we find to constructively use the data that's available. How to train your teachers, how to use it, using those data points that are collected, sharing best practices based off the data with your high-performing classrooms and teachers, how to align the data, if you will, to effective tools or additional curriculum, and then building awareness with those support tools. So I just shared with you some background about Tutor.com, the Princeton review. I shared with you what studies are showing right now in regards to reports of the different data points that are available. And we have all agreed that the districts have a water hose or a fire hose of data sharing coming towards them. And we've talked about the different type of reports that Tutor.com is able to provide our partners. And lastly, what can you do with that report, those data reports? Now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague who will now talk to you a little bit about the data culture.
Thank you, Tanya. That was really informative, extremely interesting, and that was awesome. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to take the conversation and just kind of move forward with some more ideas and some more conversation about having a data-driven culture. And why, for example, in the beginning, why is it essential? And I'll relate everything that we say about Tutor.com, because I think that's a very important part of our discussion. But a data-driven culture is essential because you want to be associated with a service that can provide equitable academic support. These services have to impact all students, not just the high-achieving kids, not just the kids in the middle, but all students, whether they're struggling, whether they're doing okay, or whether they're doing amazing. We need to provide equitable academic support. And that's been part of our mission at Tutor.com for more than 20 years. It's been part of our mission at the Princeton Review for more than 40 years. We also want to alleviate teacher burnout and try to help respond to shortages. In my discussions on a regular basis with districts around the country, there is a common theme that there is a teacher shortage, and that teachers are trying to do tutoring after school, and they're trying to help students, and they're trying to be available. But it is challenging right now because they've been at it for so long that a burnout does exist. So this ability to provide data to help students when they need is really important. We also want to reach students at their moment of need. We know that a lot of schools provide amazing services after school to students, but remember that a lot of students, and there's parents here, so that we may be talking about your students, they're not available after school because they may have sports, they may be in activities, they may have to work, they may have to take care of siblings, so they're not able to take advantage of some after school resources. So the ability to reach their students at their moment of need is crucial. And not only do you want to meet them in their moment of need, but you want it to be personalized instruction. What is it that they need help with, and when is it they need help? Tutor.com accomplishes that because it is an on-demand service. We want to be able to strategically combat learning loss. Learning loss is a real thing. It is not just a term that was made up because of virtual learning. It is a real thing. There are students across this country in all districts that were set back because of virtual learning. It is happening. I hear it from districts all the time. So if you want to have a data-driven culture, it really helps to identify and support accelerated learning, because we have to get our kids back to where they once were. It is not easy. It is challenging. It is a day in and day out situation, but services like Tutor.com can go a long way to support that. And one of the reasons why is because we'll measure and accelerate student achievement. We can let you know how your students are doing. Next slide, Mercedes, please. So what are some of the best practices that we've seen for cultivating a data-driven culture? We want to make sure, number one, that the data is relevant and is easy to access. Teachers are so busy, they have so many things on their plate that we don't need them to be looking around trying to pull reports and analyze data. We want them to have access to data quickly, that's relevant, and it's easy to get to. We have, for example, we have a client portal that we train teachers how to use, and it's very simple. You can see who's been utilizing the service. You can actually see transcripts of the sessions. You can see all that very easily. Next point, please. And we also want to make sure that whatever data we can provide aligns with the district goals. What is it at your district that you're trying to achieve, whether you're at the administration level, at the teacher level, at the support level, whatever it is, whether it's improving AP test scores, getting your SAT scores up, improving your graduation rate, whatever that might be, we want to work with you to align our data so that we are satisfying the goals of your district. We also want to provide ongoing support and training. At Tutor.com, we have an amazing client success team that will work with you to not only get you trained initially, but also to continuously support you and work with you to ensure that that this is going well. What I often say to our district partners is that I've seen in my experience that there's two essential pieces to having a successful partnership with Tutor.com. Number one is that we get staff, we get teachers to encourage students to use it. That's very important. For example, if you're an English teacher and you have an essay that's due next week, you have your students submit a draft of that essay to us for review before they turn in the final one. That type of response and advice is really beneficial. The other factor that I think is essential to having a successful partnership is having parents be made aware that this service exists. Because if they do that, number one, they can encourage their students to use it. Number two, they don't have to help their kids with homework all the time. I'm sure all of you can remember during that pandemic, I as a parent, and I'm sure a lot of you, had to try to help your sons and daughters with their homework. And that can be helpful, but it's not always helpful. So providing this kind of support is very important. And then finally, you want to emphasize the value and the impact on your students. Like, is this helping? With Tutor.com, students have the opportunity to provide us with feedback. I believe we get about a 40% participation in our optional surveys. And what students tell us time and time again is about 95% of students who respond to us tell us that Tutor.com is helping improve their grades. So if you've got 95% of your students saying that a service is helping improve your grades, then I think that's really essential that we can emphasize that value, that we know that that service works. And the goal there is to get more students to use it. So I think that's really important when you cultivate this data culture. Next slide, please. So let me get a little bit more specific with the types of actionable data that we can provide you. Number one, I mentioned it a moment ago, is we will provide staff and administrators with access to a client portal, which is fantastic because any time of the day or night, you have access to actionable data. You can see who's using the service, when they're using it. There's all kinds of data that's available there. And how many times have districts bought a service, they have no idea how it works? That's not the case here because we can provide access to this portal, which is 24 hours, 7 days a week. So it's fantastic. Also, every month, at the beginning of every month, you will receive a detailed, what we call a usage report, which is gives you significant usage data for the previous month. And that includes things like who's using the service, what subject are they using it for, what time of the day. You're going to see all of the student comments from that previous month, which is very, very important. You know, it's what are your students thinking about this service? Is it working? And that's incredibly important, excuse me, and very actionable. You can see if they're using it. If you're not getting use, well, then we need to have a conversation so we can see what's going wrong. And we can advise how to change that. And that's something that we can do for you. In addition to that, we don't want you to wait for data. Our tutors are required to provide a post-session report that required to fill one out. And if they see any type of potential intervention issue with that student, we will advise you via email basically right away. So you don't have to wait for that. We're going to provide you with actionable data on that, you know, when that occurs. So I think those are very important. And I think that comes from our experience in working with students for many, many years. And if you have any questions, you know, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Next slide, please. And, you know, I've talked a lot and, you know, Tanya's said quite a bit, but I think it's important at some point that we give you feedback. And I want you to see and hear what one of our district partners says. So I put together, we added this quote just to kind of share with you some, I think, which is a phenomenal partner and what they have to say about data and analytics from using Tutor.com. It comes from Huntington Beach Union High School District in Huntington Beach, California. And what they said to us was, and I'll just read it, Huntington Beach Union High School District values the partnership we have with Tutor.com for many reasons. First, they offer bilingual English, Spanish, and Vietnamese tutors, which helps level the playing field for our English learners. Tutor.com also runs analytic analytics that provide insights into how students are using the tool, in which subject areas students are struggling, and during what times of the day or night our students are logging in. The customer service Tutor.com provides is outstanding. They are always willing to visit our school campuses, talk to our teachers, administrators, families, and present at professional development workshops. Additionally, having 24/7 free tutoring services for all of our students promotes equity and accessibility, because for many of our parents, paying for a tutor is not fiscally possible. So I think that's like just a dynamic quote. Love it. And I just wanted to share that with everyone, because I think this is really kind of hits the nail on the head with what we're talking about. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more, what sets us apart. Our commitment to student success, without question. We've been a trusted partner for more than 20 years, providing on-demand, one-on-one tutoring, whether you need help with a homework problem, whether you have a test tomorrow and you're not sure about something, whether you just, maybe you didn't get something that was discussed in class today. We are there to help you when you need it. We've got over 23 million one-on-one sessions, which obviously that experience is, I don't think anyone else can say that. Our more than 3,000 tutors gives us the bandwidth to provide support to all districts across the country. Our learning services team is an amazing organization that helps schedule tutors accordingly. So we know exactly when the needs are, and we will schedule accordingly to make sure that your students can get access to us when they need it. From the standpoint of our tutors, the vetting of our tutors, obviously FERPA and COPA compliance is just a given, because that's something in this day and age we have to do. But our vetting process goes without question. With our criminal and educational and background checks, our onboarding rate of 1.2% just shows you how rigorous that process is. And then our quality control is, I think, is the best. We review every session to ensure that we have the highest quality tutors, and we say that very, very seriously. Some of the resources that we provide, which maybe we didn't mention here, but I think it's very much worth mentioning, is the option to speak with your tutor. You can conduct your session either via voice or via chat, and I think that's very important, because that voice option is critical for success with younger learners, it's critical for English learners, and it's critical for learners with special needs. So I think that's a given. Our alignment and being a service of the Princeton Review means that you're going to get the highest quality test prep when you partner with us and utilize Tutor.com. These courses are designed by the Princeton Review. We also support you with a lot of different college admissions tools, which again come from the Princeton Review, who's been around for more than 40 years. I think our customer experience goes without dating. We talked about the real-time data, but our client success team, our client service managers that you are assigned to you, are extremely well trained. They are amazing, and I learn from them on a daily basis. And just so you know, we do have technical support that is available 7 days a week for students in case they have a question about anything that may come up. And then could you please go to the next slide? And just real quick, I wanted to introduce everyone to something that it's very exciting that's coming out. We have a new platform that we'll be introducing later this year. It's called LEO, which stands for Learner Engagements Online. What we're seeing is a lot of districts have various resources for tutoring, whether it might be teachers after school, it could be working with college students, it could be peer tutoring, it could be maybe there's a nonprofit in your community that's providing tutoring. LEO is a new platform that provides access to the platform for all of those different entities. So it's the ability to schedule, to deliver analytics for all of those different support services. You don't have to figure out like, how is my nonprofit doing? How are the college kids doing for tutoring? They're all going to access the Tutor.com platform, which is called LEO, and you're going to get all the same data that we've been discussing under one platform. So I think that's really exciting. I think it's the logical next step, and we'd love to share that with you. And details will be coming out very shortly about that. Next slide, please. At the end, we're almost done here. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that we empower students to achieve and to succeed. We've won a lot of awards, but I think the biggest award for us is that when we get feedback from students and we hear how well they are receiving Tutor.com, what our district partners are saying is that's the real prize for me. But we do get a lot of awards from the industry, which I think are also extremely important. But we do empower students to achieve and to succeed, regardless of who you are, where you live, how you're doing. It doesn't matter. We support our students. Next slide, please. Are there any questions? We'd love to answer any questions. I know Tanya's still on with us. If you have any questions, you can please put them in the Q&A box, and love to answer any questions that anyone may have.
So
Hey,
we did receive a couple of questions. One question is, are the monthly reports made public?
They are distributed to the district and school personnel that have indicated that they want it. If they disseminate it to the public, that's typically would be their decision, but we don't send it to the general public.
Thank you.
And every session, just so you know, just to amplify on that, every session that occurs between our tutors and students is completely confidential because we don't have cameras and there's no personal items discussed. We can't see the student can't see us, and it's a very anonymous session. All we know is that the student's name and that they need help with, for example, algebra. We don't know where they're from, what state, what district, what school. That has nothing to do with our service. So it becomes very anonymous, and we think that that's the best route for us to take.
Another question we have from Catherine: how do you convince a school district that your data is more meaningful?
You want to answer that, Tanya?
Yes, so I would first start with what does the school district consider meaningful information, right? What is their strategy? What is their goal? Because obviously, what I stated earlier, a lot of school districts use this data to help drive instruction. So the data that you would receive from Tutor.com specifically provides a district with a snapshot of who's using the program, when they're using the program, what subjects, and specifically what subtopics that they're asking for additional help. So in order to convince a school district about the importance of our data, if you will, I would start by asking them, what do they find to be very important? But then also emphasize the reports that they will receive and how that will help them drive instruction, how it will help them with having some very deliberate conversations with principals and leaders, if you will, and helping them to, as we stated, with courses. If you find that a lot of your students are asking for additional help in, let's say, in another algebra course, perhaps you need a pre-algebra course. So my roundabout way of answering that is that I would ask them, one, what are their goals? Two, help them identify ways that they can use the data from Tutor.com right now in their district.
Thank you, Tanya. And another question we have is, how can parents and families take advantage of available data and tools to help children at home?
Ed, you want to get that one, or are you?
Sure, I think, so that's a great question. And what I would say is that parents should understand that when the district has partnered with Tutor.com, that all of the sessions that occur between their student and our tutors are recorded. And those recordings are maintained in that student's account. They're actually under something called My Account. And you just click that on, go to previous sessions, and then that student can review all of their sessions. I always encourage parents to ask their students, are you using Tutor.com? Can I look at some of your sessions? Because I think that's a really good way to just kind of see how that's going. In addition to that, within Tutor.com, we have a topic that's called Study and Life Skills, which I highly encourage parents to take a look at. this is where you can connect with a qualified tutor and work and discuss things like getting organized, managing stress, improving study skills, etc. And that's become really popular, I think, with the world of distance learning that we just got out of, and all the things that happened during the pandemic. So I think parents can be involved in the Tutor.com process. I think looking at maybe asking your son or daughter to look at some of their sessions and maybe sharing that would be, I think, is a great idea. And then maybe even participating in a life study and life skills session with your son or daughter would be highly encouraged. So I think, yeah, there's definitely ways for parents to be involved with that, especially if they're younger, if they're of elementary or middle school age. I think that's a must. High school might be a little bit more of a challenge because your students may not want you to access that, but I think that's definitely worth that conversation.
And Ed, if I can add on that, they
Yeah.
actually, the end of the session, the student can email that transcript to their parents as well at the end. So whenever they connect with the tutor and the end of the session, there's an opportunity for the student to email that transcript to you as the parent, so you will have it.
That's great.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Ed. If there are more questions, please put in the chat. If not, we can wrap up with this last question that we have, which is, are districts using too many digital tools? And do you recommend potentially reducing the number of tools available to students?
I recommend, I would say first do an audit. I would say first do an audit of, you want tools that are relevant, that are being used. And the audit not necessarily just being from the student's perspective, from the teacher's perspective as well, and as well as the parent. So I would do, first, I would say, let's do an internal audit of all of the tools that we have that are used, and ask those questions from a teacher, administrator, student, and parents' perspective. And then look at those tools and ask yourself, how can I manage all these tools in one hub, or being able to manage all the data in one specific area? Because you might find that there is a little bit of overlap, or you might find that some are utilized more than others. You might find Tutor.com is one of the resources that most of your students ask for when they need additional help. They may not necessarily sign up for after school in-person tutoring with my teacher, but what they might do is say, I want tutoring on demand. I want to be home with my parents, and that's when I'll ask for additional help. Because to be honest, some of our students may not be as confident asking questions in the classroom as they are just being in their own space. So I would say, let's do an audit of what's being used, how they're being used, and not just now in the present. I think giving yourself a timeline, because as we know, with anything that starts, it takes a while for it to build momentum in any particular system. So for instance, with Tutor.com, building that momentum today, you may not have as much usage as you might tomorrow. So looking at an audit and looking at it with a 5-year or couple year goal in mind. Ed?
I'd like to add something to that too. I think a key word that I hear with speaking to districts across the country that I'm seeing now, the word that keeps coming to mind is sustainability. And I think that's an important word as we get closer to the end of this large federal funding influx that districts and states have received. And I think a lot of districts probably bought a lot of things, and some of them they don't need. So I think as you move forward, you're probably going to have to make some decisions about what do you move forward with and what do you not move forward with. And I think the sustainability aspect is really important. And that includes, I think, not only are students using it and benefiting from it, but also, can you afford it? Is the pricing model sustainable for a district when ESSER funding doesn't exist anymore? So I think there's a lot to do that, but I think the key word that I always mention, I hear a lot, is sustainability. So yeah, I think probably as we get to the end of 24, you will not have as many services as you probably do now. And I think the ones that will remain are the ones that are probably the most sustainable.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Tanya. That was super insightful. I just want to share the last question that came through, and that's with young learners, one-on-one tutoring usually involves a relationship that is developed over sessions. Can your younger students have the same tutor, or is a new one given since they may log on at different times?
Well, very, very good question. And we definitely acknowledge the relationship with their kiddos and their tutor. And after every session, when a student logs on to a session, they're able to identify that tutor as their favorite. And we like that because we want students to be able to connect. Like you said, you want to be able to have that connection with the tutor. And so they might go through a couple of sessions and they realize, I really enjoyed my time with this particular tutor and I want them as my favorite. And because you're my favorite, when I log on, I can actually see that my favorite is available. I can connect with them. So we do understand that relationship. But we also understand that a student can have several favorites. So it may not necessarily just be one, but a student might select several favorites that they can actually connect with their tutoring their tutoring sessions. And then they can connect with them when they're available.
Great
Thank
question.
you. And that's everything for our Q&A. Thank you to everyone that attended, and thank you for all of the thoughtful questions.
Great. Well, I've enjoyed it, and I thank you so much. And I hope you'll be able to attend our next upcoming webinars that are on the screen there. We would love for you to continue this webinar series with us. And please let your fellow teachers, school districts, and other parents know about our webinars. We love to hear from you.
Thank you for joining us. It was great.
Thank you. And just to add a little bit of detail about our upcoming webinars, the next one is going to be on February 16th, and we will be taking a deep dive into 2022 tutoring K12 trends, so you can plan for the year ahead. And then our last webinar of our series will be on the 28th, which will be focused on the new digital SAT. So this is a great webinar for all K12 leaders and educators, but even more so for parents and counselors really interested in learning how to make sure that their students are prepared for the upcoming digital SAT.
And Mercedes, there's one last question about recording of this session.
Yes, so everyone who registered and attended, or if for folks that couldn't attend, everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a recording of the webinar, so you can view it later and have it as a resource for you moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much.
And then if anyone has any other questions after we're done, you've got both Tanya and my emails there. Please feel free to email either one of us or both of us, and we'd be happy to continue speaking with you about anything, any questions you may have.
Ed, I don't think it's maybe irrelevant, but do you think we should tell them where we're located?
I guess, yeah, I think so. It shouldn't be a secret. Go ahead.
I am in Georgia. I'm in the Georgia area here. I think that's good to know if I have any of my Georgia parents and districts that are in the area as well.
I live in Los Angeles, so I am on the West Coast, although right now I am in freezing Austin, Texas, hoping that my flight doesn't get canceled tonight. But yeah, if you need to reach us, happy to speak with you at any time.
Thank you. We will conclude the webinar at this time. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.